Let's just jump right in, shall we? It's the question that's on everybody's mind. Whether you're at the grocery store or just scrolling online, why is everything so expensive right now? You've definitely had that moment. You look at a price tag and you just have to ask yourself, how on earth did it get this high? And look, you're not imagining it. Prices for just about everything have been on a wild ride. To really understand why, we have to go beyond that sticker price and uncover the real story behind it. And it's not just your everyday stuff. Take a look at the luxury market. Vogue Business is reporting that a Burberry tote, for instance, just jumped by 12%. So what's really going on here? The answer, it turns out, isn't just one thing. It's more like a combination of factors all hitting at once, creating a kind of perfect storm. So first, let's get a handle on the big picture here. Because when you talk to economists and analysts, they're not pointing to just one single cause. Instead, they're calling this a perfect storm. Yeah, this isn't just about one country or one specific industry. It's this tangled, complicated web of global events. So let's start peeling back the layers, one by one, to see exactly how we got to this point. All right, let's start with the first layer, government policies. Specifically, how these policies can directly add to the cost of pretty much everything that moves around the world. A huge one here is tariffs. You can just think of them as taxes on imported goods. Now, the idea is that they're supposed to protect industries at home, but they can have this major side effect, which is making everything from finished products to the raw materials needed to make them more expensive for all of us. And we're not talking about a small impact here. An analysis that the Associated Press cited projects that these tariffs could hike up costs for U.S. factories by somewhere between 2 and 4.5%. Now, for any business, that's a big deal. But if you're on already thin margins, that's a massive hit. So what happens to those extra costs? They don't just disappear. Reports from outlets like AP News and US Bank confirm what you'd probably guess. Major companies, from Walmart all the way to J.M. Smucker, pass those costs directly on to us, the consumers. But it's not just policy, right? As sources like the Associated Press and Economic Impact have pointed out, there are these physical pressure points that are really squeezing global trade. You've got attacks on ships in the Red Sea, which forces them into these long, costly detours, and then climate change is creating its own mess with serious droughts slowing down traffic through a critical route like the Panama Canal.
Okay, so let's move on to the next layer and see how this all starts to build up. All of these tensions we just talked about are creating a gigantic bottleneck in the actual movement of goods. You can think of it like a massive global traffic jam.
This chart from the Boston Fed, wow, it tells the story perfectly. It tracks weekly shipping costs, and you can clearly see these two massive spikes since 2020. First from the pandemic, and then again from those recent canal issues. I mean, just look at that jump. Costs went from maybe a couple $1,000s for a container to over $15,000 at the peak. Insane. And here's where you can really see the impact on your own wallet. When we lay U.S. import prices over that same exact chart, the connection is it's undeniable. The two lines move almost perfectly together. As shipping costs go through the roof, the prices of the things we import follow right behind them. That traffic jam out on the ocean leads directly to higher prices in the store. Okay, now here's where things get a little more nuanced, because depending on what you measure, you can actually get a very different story. A report from the Richmond Fed points this out. If you look at indexes that only focus on ocean shipping, things look incredibly stressful. But if you look at broader measures, ones that include air freight, for example, the pressure suddenly looks a lot closer to normal. This helps explain why you might be hearing conflicting things about just how bad the supply chain problem really is. So all of this brings us to the big debate happening among economists right now. What's the main engine driving all this inflation? Is it really all about the supply issues we've been talking about, or is there something else going on? Analysis from places like the Brookings Institution really boils this whole debate down to two main camps. On one side, you have what they call supply shocks. That's all the bottlenecks and delays that drive up costs. And on the other side, you have demand pull. That's the idea that really strong consumer spending and a hot job market are the things pulling prices up. So which one is it? Well, a pretty big study from the Brookings Institution came down firmly on one side. They concluded, and I'm quoting here, that the vast majority of the COVID-19 inflation surge is accounted for by supply-linked factors. In other words, things like delivery delays were a much, much bigger driver of this than strong consumer demand was. And that brings us to a pretty controversial term you've probably heard thrown around: greedflation. It's this idea that some companies might have used all the chaos in the supply chain as a cover, a way to raise prices even more than they needed to, just to boost their own profits. And this isn't just some fringe theory. It connects directly to what that Brookings study found about the rise in company margins being a key factor. There's one more key dynamic in the supply chain we need to talk about, something called the bullwhip effect. Okay, so picture this. A local store sees a small jump in demand for something, so they order a little bit extra from their supplier. That supplier, the wholesaler, sees that order and orders even more from the manufacturer. You see? Research confirms that the shocks from the pandemic made this effect way more dramatic, causing these huge, volatile swings all the way up the supply chain. So, after peeling back all of these different layers, what does it all actually mean for the price you end up paying for, well, for everything? Here's the most important takeaway. This isn't a simple problem with a simple cause. It's a complex chain reaction. It starts with things like policy and geopolitics adding extra costs. Then, that gets magnified by physical jams in the global shipping network. And on top of all that, it's made even more complicated by economic effects, like the bullwhip effects and debates over company profits. All of it comes together to create that sticker shock we're all feeling. So, how are businesses dealing with all this? Well, sources like Economist Impact show they're adapting, and they're adapting fast. They're stocking up on more inventory to act as a buffer. They're figuring out new shipping routes. And in some cases, they're even just pausing sales to places where the costs are simply too high to make it work. And all of this leaves us with one final, very big question. When we look at the future, which seems to promise even more global friction from politics to climate change, we have to wonder, are these fragile supply chains and these higher costs just something we have to get used to? Is this actually the new normal?